Russia begins not as an empire, but as a question. A vast, silent land stretching beyond the edge of maps, shaped by rivers, forests, and long winters that taught its people endurance before they ever learned power. In the early centuries, small Slavic communities gathered along trade routes, linking Europe to Asia, absorbing influences from Byzantium, from Mongol rule, from the Orthodox Church, and from the harsh realities of survival on open plains. Authority came slowly, and when it did, it came with weight. The rise of Moscow was not sudden or glorious. It was methodical, patient, and relentless. Princes learned that to rule Russia meant controlling land, loyalty, and fear in equal measure. Over time, the idea of Russia fused with the idea of centralized power, and the ruler became more than a leader. He became the state itself. By the time the title of Tsar was claimed, Russia had already accepted a truth that would echo for centuries. Stability mattered more than freedom, order more than comfort. Even the terrible embodied this belief with brutal clarity. He expanded the borders, crushed opposition, and ruled through terror, leaving behind a nation that feared chaos more than cruelty. After him, dynasties rose and fell, but the pattern remained. Power flowed downward from the throne, and survival depended on obedience. The Romanovs transformed Russia into a continental empire, stretching from Europe to the Pacific, commanding millions of lives and countless cultures. Under Peter the Great, Russia forced itself into the modern world, shaving beards, building navies, founding cities like St. Petersburg as windows to the West. But modernization came from the top down, imposed, not chosen. Progress was something done to the people, not by them. The cost of empire was enormous. Serfs lived bound to land and masters, their lives measured in labor and silence. Reforms arrived late and often half-finished. When emancipation finally came in the 19th century, it brought freedom without security and resentment without resolution. Russia entered the modern age carrying unresolved contradictions, immense power and deep fragility, intellectual brilliance and political repression, spiritual depth and systemic violence. These tensions finally exploded in the early 20th century. World War I shattered what remained of imperial authority. Soldiers starved, cities froze, and faith in the Tsar collapsed. In 1917, Russia did not simply change governments. It broke apart. The revolution promised everything the old order never delivered: equality, dignity, control over one's own fate. The Bolsheviks spoke in the language of justice and inevitability, offering a future where history itself would side with the oppressed. But revolutions do not erase habits of power. They inherit them. As the Soviet Union emerged from civil war, it replaced the throne with ideology, the Tsar with the party, and faith with doctrine. Under Lenin, and then far more ruthlessly under Stalin, the state became absolute. Millions were mobilized, industrialized, imprisoned, or erased in the name of a radiant future that always remained just out of reach. The Soviet Union survived by transforming suffering into purpose. Factories rose from fields, cities expanded, and victory in World War II carved the nation's trauma into its identity. The Great Patriotic War was not just a military triumph. It was proof to many Russians that sacrifice was sacred and that the state, no matter how harsh, was worth defending. After the war, the USSR stood as one of two global superpowers, locked in a Cold War defined as much by fear as by ideology. Nuclear weapons, space races, proxy wars, and propaganda shaped a world balanced on the edge of annihilation. For Soviet citizens, life was stable, predictable, and tightly controlled. The system promised security, education, and national pride, but demanded conformity and silence in return. Over time, the weight of this bargain grew unbearable. The economy stagnated. The ideals rang hollow. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was exhausted. When it collapsed, it did so quietly, almost unexpectedly, leaving behind not victory or defeat, but confusion. Overnight, a superpower dissolved into 15 independent states. For Russia, the 1990s were not a celebration of freedom. They were a decade of loss. State industries vanished into private hands. Corruption flourished. Life expectancy dropped. And millions felt humiliated by poverty and irrelevance. Democracy arrived without trust. Capitalism arrived without rules. The old system was gone, but nothing solid had replaced it. From this chaos emerged a familiar idea, wearing a new face. Vladimir Putin did not promise utopia. He promised order, stability, respect. He spoke the language Russia had heard before, grounded in strength, sovereignty, and the restoration of national dignity. Under his rule, the state reasserted control over media, politics, and strategic industries. The economy stabilized, fueled by oil and gas. Wages rose. Chaos receded. For many Russians, this was not authoritarianism returning. It was normalcy restored. Power once again flowed from the center, and once again the trade-off was clear. Modern Russia is shaped by memory as much as policy. The trauma of collapse, the pride of victory, the fear of weakness, all coexist in its national psyche. The military is rebuilt not just as a force, but as a symbol. Foreign policy is framed through the lens of encirclement and historical grievance. NATO's expansion is not seen as abstract geopolitics, but as a repetition of past invasions. Ukraine is not just a neighbor, but a mirror reflecting unresolved questions of identity, history, and control. To the outside world, Russia often appears aggressive, opaque, unpredictable. Inside, many see it as defensive, misunderstood, and unfairly judged. Russian society today is complex and layered. Cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg pulse with modern life, technology, culture, and global connection. Younger generations are educated, digitally fluent, and exposed to the world. At the same time, political space remains narrow. Dissent carries risk. Independent voices operate under pressure. The state emphasizes unity, tradition, and loyalty, framing criticism as destabilization rather than debate. The economy remains resilient yet vulnerable, tied closely to energy exports and strained by sanctions. Ordinary people navigate these realities pragmatically, focused less on ideology than on survival, family, and dignity. Russia's story, then and now, is not a simple arc from darkness to light or from tyranny to freedom. It is a cycle shaped by geography, history, and hard lessons learned through loss. Power has always been central because chaos has always been terrifying. Sacrifice has always been honored because survival often demanded it. The nation moves forward carrying its past like a shadow, never fully escaping it, never fully surrendering to it. To understand Russia is not to excuse its actions or condemn its choices, but to recognize the depth of the forces that drive them. This is a country that has been invaded, expanded, collapsed, and risen again, each time reshaping itself without ever quite letting go of who it has been. And as the world watches Russia today, calculating its moves, questioning its intentions, it is watching a civilization still negotiating its relationship with power, fear, and identity. The story is unfinished. It always has been.